Hello and welcome back to the Working Mama podcast, the podcast for working mums navigating career, motherhood, identity, ambition, and all the invisible things in between. And today I want to talk about something that I honestly did not see coming when I became a mum. Because when my kids were babies and toddlers, I remember thinking this was the hard part. I'm in the trenches and this is difficult. It actually probably couldn't get any harder than this. In some respects, yes, with the broken sleep, the daycare drop-offs, trying to get out the door in the morning, the emotional guilt of returning back to work after parental leave, and alongside as well, the juggle of childcare, the meetings, the sickness, and also the sleep deprivation. And please don't get me wrong, this phase is very, very hard. But what I didn't realize that as your kids get older, the challenges don't necessarily disappear. Instead, they actually change shape, and your kids need you in such a different way. It's very emotional and physical. Yes, I get it when they're younger. They probably need you less physically when they're getting older. They definitely need you more emotionally, but also you're there physically almost as an Uber driver. Because you know what as well, when kids were younger, childcare had structure. You drop your children off at around 8:30 or 8 o'clock, whenever you do in the morning. You pick them up in the afternoon. For me, it was generally around about 5:30. There was consistency. I knew I could drop them off before work, pick them up after work, and everything that happened in between, I was focused on work. There was consistency. There was also coverage around school holidays and the like. You know what? Now that I've got one child in school, one in sessional kinder/childcare, and also in 6 months' time, I have two at school. So now, as a working mum, I'm navigating school hours that don't align with work hours, unlike childcare. That was amazing. Sports trainings, after school activities, homework, the mental load of dinner planning and what I can get on the table within 5 minutes of walking in the door, uniforms to clean, weekend sport schedules to navigate, and then trying to work 4 days, which is more like a full-time load in the middle of it all. And sometimes I genuinely feel like an Uber driver with a laptop or an iPad. I either spend half my life saying, everyone in the car, who's got the runners, we're running late, swimming's about to start. And also my number one thing is I say, what are we going to do today? We're going to have fun. And that's my main thing about the after school activities, is actually about having fun. I don't care how they're going, they're winning, they're losing. I just want them genuinely to have fun. And I know that so many working mums listening to this are also in the exact same phase. Or if you've got young children, this is something that I wish I had heard much, much earlier. I was even with friends on the weekend, actually a few different groups of friends, and we were all talking about the fact of, oh my God, my kids have A, a better social life than what I do, and also B, the logistics and the mental load that goes on in trying to navigate, and I say try, all the sports activities. So it's just a challenge that evolves as a mum. And I think that one of the biggest surprises in motherhood is actually realizing that every season comes with its own side and own kind of hard. Because we all think at the moment, yep, we're in the hardest season. But they're all hard in their actual own right. Nothing necessarily gets easier. They just change, shift, and evolve. When your kids are babies, people often say it gets easier. But as I said, I think it actually becomes different. I wouldn't necessarily say easier. They're emotionally, everything's different. Logistically, things are different. And mentally, things are different. I wouldn't say easier. And what I'm finding in this school age plus phase is that the mental load becomes incredibly operational. You become the coordinator of everyone's lives, yes, even with a shared calendar and a written calendar in the kitchen that says what everyone's doing on what day. We're managing calendars, activities, birthdays, communication, The Update alerts from both Compass, Story Park, the WhatsApp groups for every different single sport that there is possibly around, school events that just come at you with a week's notice, sports schedules, social schedules, and then also work schedules on top of all of that. Yes, we're down the bottom. And a lot of that invisible coordination, unfortunately, still disproportionately falls on mothers. That's a big word, isn't it? Something that Professor Leah Ruppanner talks often about is this idea of cognitive labor, the remembering, anticipating, and planning work that women often carry in households. And honestly, that really relates into this season of motherhood, because it's not necessarily the sport itself that's exhausting. It's the constant thinking, the constant mental tabs open in your brain of what day is it, what sports activities do I have on, so then what equipment do I need to prepare for as I pick up my kids from after school. Now, I do also want to premise this as well and say this episode is not about me complaining about my kids doing activities, because I actually really love my kids exploring sport, exploring their interests. And as I've mentioned recently in a podcast, I have a really hard time of actually saying no to my kids doing sport. I would actually rather probably be busy doing sports activities than them probably at home on a device watching TV or something like that. So please don't say that I'm anti-sport. I'm not. As I said, I like this fact, but I just want to acknowledge that there is a mental load and mental gymnastics that does come with this season. So the more sports activities that your kids do, it's also something that you have to consider. I think there's so much that we can do from kids' sport, and also just the value and the leadership that can come from it, and just all the life skills. I could go on for a whole other tangent on what I think about the value of sport. I'm a massive advocate. But I also don't think that there's one way to do this. I just want to acknowledge the fact of the challenge and also the seasons that we go through as mums. I know some families only limit it to one or two activities. Some families also love multiple sports and activities. I'm in that party. And I know it's not all about sports. There is also arts and languages and the like. There's so many different things for kids to do. And I think parents should absolutely decide what works for their family, capacity, finances, and also their children. So it's not a one size fits all. As I said, just want to acknowledge how hard it is. But as I was saying, for us, sport has created really beautiful things. It's given my kids, both of them, confidence in their skills and abilities, new friendships, routine, resilience, and also, I think, most importantly, teamwork. There is something said to be, in later in life, particularly when you're in an organization, particularly if you're working for someone else other than yourself, teamwork is so important. I've had also some really lovely conversations, I have to say, on the sidelines of my kids' sport. I start chatting to other parents. I've had some really lovely conversations standing on the sidelines of sport. I get chatting to other parents. You also realize that everyone is navigating a similar chaos. You share stories. You laugh about dinner being a reheat for the second time. And it's also nice going somewhere and you've actually got your people going, oh, cool, I'm not the only one going through this. And you actually find your village also within these communities as well. Because modern parenting can feel incredibly isolating sometimes. So while there is this phase of we're busy, there's also some beautiful moments inside it too. And I have to say, with both of my boys, I've made already some really lovely friendships with both of their friends' parents, and it's nice to actually go to sports trainings and actually catch up. It feels like now that's sometimes my social circle, because I do spend time between the different activities. So you might as well make the most of it from what you can. I think what's difficult in this modern family life and this era that we are in, it often feels like it was designed for a different era though. School hours don't align with work hours. Many workplaces still operate like someone is at home handling logistics, and yet families generally need two incomes. So parents, particularly mothers, end up trying to bridge all of these gaps. And I think that many of us quietly wonder, how are we supposed to sustainably do this for years? Because it's not just the sports and actually trying to go through all the logistics of what is on what day and what training do I need to get to. It's the work, the household management, the emotional labor, the dinner prep, remembering everything, remembering to be present parents, trying to maintain careers, and also trying to maintain a semblance of our true selves. And sometimes it feels like there is no white space anywhere. A few things that are helping me in this season. Number one, accepting that dinner doesn't need to be perfect every night. And I'm starting to get better at what can go in an oven and be there for an hour. The first day, actually, I did have a bit of anxiety of like, oh my goodness, how am I going to manage this and have dinner, and I don't want it to be too late. It was something that I've now had to work up my confidence in and get over that anxiety. And honestly, sports nights are survival nights sometimes. Shared calendars are important and certainly essential. And third, I have to let go of the guilt about being busy. And also sometimes I might be at a sports practice, particularly basketball training, and I will not feel guilty about taking that work call because you know what? Just got to get done. They're being looked after by a coach. They're doing a great time. I don't have to watch every single ball being bounced. There is an element of guilt that can go along with that. But you know what? I'm starting actually to go, I don't need to see it all. But sometimes I do also need to just answer that email. Yes, people can maybe criticize me for this, but everyone, if you're doing it, please know you're not alone. And there's probably about 4 other mums sitting down the bench doing exactly the same thing. I think sometimes we feel that life feels rushed. But many families are operating under enormous logistical pressures right now. And look, it is hard. You often want flexible work so you can take your kids to that sports activities. And finally, trying to find the moments of connection inside the chaos. And you know what? Sometimes the best conversations can happen in the car to and from sports training. Mind you, I will say, feed them first, as Jen Muir often talks about. But they can also happen after training, on the sidelines, and also during pickup. I've had some great chats with both of my boys to and from swimming and the variety of different activities that they do. And they tell me about their day and I get those gems of gold. So I might not be looking directly at them, but I'm still having moments of connection and hearing about their days. And that's okay. If you're listening to this while driving to sport, folding uniforms, making dinner at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, or mentally planning for tomorrow already, I see you. Please know you're not alone. And maybe this phase of motherhood isn't harder or easier than the earlier years. It's just a different version of the juggle. It's a different version of the mental load, a different version of trying to make modern life and modern working motherhood work. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Working Mama podcast. And if this episode really resonated with you, I would absolutely love if you shared it with another working mum who might currently feel like a full-time logistics manager, because I think a lot more women are carrying this than we openly talk about. Have a great day and see you next time.